He had fought for Earth once before, in wars that left scars on both his body and soul. Now, as the stars dimmed and the echoes of forgotten battles whispered through his thoughts, the call came again. But this time, it wasn't just for his world. It was for all of humanity. Colonel Garret Cain stood on the observation deck of the Odyssey, gazing out into the abyss of space. The silence was unnerving, yet familiar. There was always a quiet before the storm, a fleeting moment where time seemed to freeze before chaos unraveled. At 67 years old, Garret was long past his prime, by Earth standards at least. But age had not dulled his instincts. If anything, it had honed them into something sharper, more lethal. Experience was the ultimate weapon, one he had carried across decades and battlefields strewn across the stars. They were calling him back. Not because they had any choice. They called him because no one else could answer. The Odyssey hummed beneath his feet, its ancient hull creaking from the strain of preparing for war again. This ship had seen more battles than most commanders in the fleet, and Garret had been with her through most of them. She was old, just like him, but there was something left in both of them, just enough to make a difference one last time. "Colonel, they're waiting for you in the war room," came the voice of his second-in-command, Lieutenant Riker, a fresh-faced officer barely 30. His youth almost a stark contrast to Garret's weathered presence. Garret nodded, his steel-gray eyes locking on the distant stars for just a moment longer before turning away. "Let's not keep them waiting." The war room was an amalgamation of cold steel and flickering holograms, casting a sterile blue light over the faces of those seated around the table. Admirals, politicians, and scientists, they all shared the same expression: fear. At the center of it all was a projection of the galactic map, highlighting the territory of the Zurkani Dominion, a vast empire of alien species that had thrived on conquest and destruction for centuries. For years, they had left humanity alone, deeming the tiny, blue planet of Earth beneath their notice. That had changed. "They attacked New Mars," Garret said, Admiral Tarek, his voice thick with exhaustion. "Wiped out the entire colony. We've lost 500,000 souls. They came out of nowhere. Our defenses were shredded in minutes." Garrett's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He had seen this before in wars long past. The Zurkani were testing humanity, probing their weaknesses. They weren't just looking for victory. They were hunting extinction. "We need you to lead the fleet, Colonel," said Ambassador Ellis, her voice trembling with barely contained fear. "You've been here before. You know how they think." Garret looked around the table, his eyes scanning each face. They were desperate, terrified. He wasn't angry at them. He understood. They hadn't fought like he had. They hadn't seen what he had seen. The Zurkani weren't just enemies. They were predators. They didn't fight wars. They ended civilizations. "Where's the council?" Garret asked, his voice low but firm. Ellis blinked. "The Galactic Council?" "That's right. The ones who promised us peace and protection. The ones who swore that if humanity joined them, we'd be under their shield." Admiral Tarek shook his head. "They've declared neutrality. They won't risk their fleets against the Zurkani." A bitter laugh escaped Garret's lips. "Of course they won't. They'll sit back and watch just like they did when the core worlds burned. Humanity's on its own." There was a moment of heavy silence, the weight of it pressing down on everyone in the room. Humanity had always been the underdog in the galaxy, scrappy and tenacious but small. Too small, it seemed, to matter in the grand scheme of things. But Garret knew something they didn't. Humanity had never won its wars because of size or strength. It had always been about willpower, the unbreakable drive to survive, to endure. That was something the Zurkani couldn't understand. And that was their mistake. "They may think we're weak," Garret said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "But they've forgotten one thing. We're human. We don't stop. We don't give up." He stood, the weight of the years on his shoulders, yet he carried it as if it were nothing. "I'll lead the fleet. But we're not going to fight this war like we have in the past. We're going to make them regret ever crossing us." Days later, the fleet was assembled. Thousands of ships, from the smallest scout vessels to the colossal dreadnoughts that carried humanity's final hope. At the heart of it all was the Odyssey, Garret's flagship. He stood on the bridge, watching as his crew prepared for battle. They were young, most of them had never seen a real war. But they were eager. They believed in him. That was what mattered. "Sir, the Zurkani fleet is approaching," Riker reported, his voice tense. Garret nodded, his expression calm. "Good. Let them come." The Zurkani ships appeared on the horizon of space like a black tide, their sleek, alien designs a stark contrast to the human vessels. They outnumbered the human fleet 3-1. Their technology was superior in every way. But Garret didn't flinch. "Prepare to engage," he ordered, his voice steady. The battle began with a fury that shook the stars. Lasers and plasma cannons lit up the darkness of space, ships exploding in brilliant flashes of light. The Zurkani were brutal, their attacks precise and unrelenting. But humanity fought back with a ferocity that defied logic. Garret watched the battle unfold from the command deck, his mind calculating, analyzing. He saw the patterns, the mistakes the Zurkani were making. They were overconfident, too used to crushing their enemies with sheer force. "Order the second wave to flank them," he commanded. "We'll draw them in, then hit them from the sides." Riker relayed the orders, and moments later, the human fleet shifted, pulling the Zurkani into a trap. The Zurkani ships were fast, but they weren't prepared for the kind of cunning Garret brought to the battlefield. "Now!" Garret barked. The human ships unleashed a barrage of firepower, tearing into the Zurkani fleet with devastating precision. Ships that had seemed invincible moments ago were now breaking apart, consumed by fire and debris. "They're pulling back, sir," Riker exclaimed. Garret allowed himself a small smile. "They didn't expect us to fight back this hard. They thought we'd crumble. But we're not done yet." The war raged on for weeks, each battle more brutal than the last. Humanity was taking heavy losses, but they were holding. Garret led them with the same iron resolve he had always shown, but even he could feel the weight of the war pressing down on him. His body ached, the years catching up with him in ways he could no longer ignore. But he couldn't stop. Not now. Not when humanity's survival was at stake. The final battle came sooner than expected. The Zurkani had gathered their full strength for one last assault, determined to wipe humanity from the stars once and for all. Garret knew this was it. If they lost here, it was over. He stood on the bridge of the Odyssey, his eyes locked on the Zurkani fleet as it approached. "All ships, prepare for combat," he ordered. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now. A quiet determination that had carried him through countless battles. The Zurkani attacked with a fury unlike anything Garret had ever seen. Their ships swarmed the human fleet, their weapons tearing through shields and armor like paper. It was chaos, pure and unrelenting. But Garret didn't waver. He had been here before, in the darkest moments of war, when all hope seemed lost. And he knew that victory wasn't about strength or numbers. It was about outthinking your enemy. "Bring us in close," he ordered, his eyes narrowing. "They're relying on their long-range weapons. We'll get in under their fire." The Odyssey surged forward, leading the charge as the human fleet closed the distance with the Zurkani. It was a risky move, but Garret had no other choice. This was their last chance. As the Odyssey weaved through the enemy ships, Garret's mind raced. There had to be a way to turn the tide, something the Zurkani wouldn't expect. And then he saw it. The Zurkani command ship was at the heart of their fleet, directing the battle from a safe distance. But it was vulnerable, exposed. If they could take it out, the Zurkani forces would be thrown into disarray. "Target their command ship," Garret ordered, his voice steady. "We take that out and we win this fight." The Odyssey moved in, its weapons locked on the Zurkani command ship. The Zurkani forces tried to block them, but it was too late. The human fleet had already broken through their lines. "Fire!" Garret commanded. The Odyssey unleashed its full firepower, and the Zurkani command ship exploded in a blinding flash of light. The shockwave rippled through the enemy fleet, sending their ships careening out of formation, confused and disorganized. Garret watched the chaos unfold on the main display. For the first time in weeks, the Zurkani were vulnerable. Their meticulously coordinated attacks dissolved into disarray as the human fleet pressed the advantage. The smaller human ships darted between the Zurkani vessels, picking them apart with calculated precision. "Sir, their fleet is falling apart." Riker's voice held a note of disbelief and triumph. Garret nodded, his face grim but determined. He could feel the weight of the years on him more than ever now. His hands trembled slightly, a reminder of the toll the war and age had taken on his body. But this was the moment. Victory was within reach. "Keep the pressure on," Garret ordered, his voice steady despite the fatigue gnawing at him. "Don't give them a chance to regroup." The human fleet surged forward, pushing the Zurkani further and further back. One by one, their ships crumbled under the relentless assault, and the Zurkani, once so confident in their superiority, now found themselves on the verge of annihilation. Garret glanced at the tactical map, seeing the red blips that represented the Zurkani fleet disappearing rapidly. He knew this was the moment he had fought for, but the cost had been staggering. The human fleet had suffered losses. Some of the best and brightest were gone, and entire colonies had been decimated. "Sir," Riker said quietly, his voice pulling Garret from his thoughts. We've won." The words hung in the air, almost unbelievable. The Zurkani, who had come to erase humanity from existence, were in full retreat. Victory was theirs, but Garret didn't feel the elation he thought he would. Instead, there was a deep sense of exhaustion, of weariness that went far beyond the physical. "Broadcast a message to all ships," Garret said, his voice hoarse. "The war is over. Humanity has prevailed." The celebrations that followed were muted, somber even. Across the stars, the survivors mourned their dead, rebuilt what they could, and tried to come to terms with the devastation left in the Zurkani's wake. The human race had survived, but they were changed, worn down, battered, but not broken. Garret Cain stood alone on the observation deck of the Odyssey, staring out into the void. The stars, once bright and full of promise, now seemed distant and cold. He had fought so many wars, sacrificed so much, and now, what was left? He thought of the men and women who had followed him into battle, the ones who had given their lives to ensure that humanity would see another day. And he thought of the future, the one he had fought so hard to secure for the next generation. "Colonel," came Riker's voice behind him. Garret turned slowly, his body stiff and aching. Riker approached, standing by his side, his youthful face etched with the same weariness that Garret carried. "They're asking for you," Riker said softly. "The Council wants to speak with you about the terms of peace." "The Zurkani have surrendered." Garret shook his head. "Let them handle it. I'm done fighting. It's time for someone else to take over." Riker hesitated, then nodded. "You've earned it, sir." For a long moment, neither of them spoke, both gazing out at the endless expanse of space. It was strange to think that after everything, after all the years of conflict, it was over. The galaxy had changed, and with it so had humanity. "You know," Garret said finally, his voice low, "there was a time when I thought I'd never live to see peace again." Riker looked at him, his brow furrowed. "And now?" Garret smiled faintly. "Now, I'm not sure I know what to do with it." There was a silence between them, one filled with the unspoken understanding of soldiers who had seen too much, survived too long. Riker, still young, had a future ahead of him, and Garret had no doubt that he would lead humanity into a new era. But for Garret, the war was over. His fight was done. "Pass the torch, Lieutenant," Garret said, his voice growing softer. "You're the future now." Riker swallowed hard, nodding. "I won't let you down, sir." "I know you won't," Garret said, placing a hand on the younger man's shoulder. "Take care of them, Riker. The next fight might not be with weapons, but it'll be just as hard." Riker nodded, the weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders. He knew the truth of Garret's words. The war with the Zurkani was over, but the challenges ahead would test humanity in new and unexpected ways. It would be up to the next generation to carry the flame forward. Months passed, and slowly the galaxy began to heal. The Zurkani, once the most feared force in the galaxy, had been humbled. The Galactic Council, which had turned its back on humanity during their darkest hour, now came crawling back, offering alliances and apologies. But Garret Cain had no interest in politics. He had left that world behind. His time was over. He had given everything he had to the war, and now all he wanted was peace. He settled on a quiet planet, far from the core worlds, where the stars shone bright in the night sky and the weight of the universe felt a little lighter. It was a place where he could finally rest, surrounded by the silence he had once feared but now welcomed. And yet, even in the quiet, the memories lingered. The faces of those he had lost, the battles he had fought, the weight of his decisions. All of it stayed with him. But now there was something else as well. Legacy. Humanity had survived because of him, because of the choices he had made and the wisdom he had gained over a lifetime of service. He had passed that legacy on to the next generation, to Riker and the others who would carry it forward. Garret Cain had fought for Earth once before, and he had fought for humanity when no one else could. Now, in the twilight of his years, he could finally rest, knowing that the future was in good hands. The stars stretched out before him, vast and infinite, and for the first time in a long while, Garret felt at peace.